You know how in thrillers you get that glimpse of a hidden world where everyday objects can become, well, instruments of something more? I always pictured a ninja in that way, not just with swords, but with these almost spectral, silent weapons. Tonight, we're pulling back the curtain on one of those.
Yeah,
The art of ninja knife throwing.
that's right. You brought us a fascinating manual knife throwing techniques of the ninja. It's not some dusty old relic, but actually a guide developed for, modern practitioners looking to hone a very specific and perhaps surprisingly nuanced skill.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is that this manual focuses on Western-style throwing knives, which kind of suggests this is an evolving discipline, embracing new tools.
Right.
There's even a companion book for the more traditional, Oriental throwing stars and stuff like that.
Which immediately tells you something about the nature of mastery. It's about adapting principles, not just sticking rigidly to specific tools. And for you, the listener, even if you never imagine yourself actually throwing a blade, understanding the focus and the methodology behind this practice can offer some real aha moments about dedication and technique in, well, pretty much any field.
Absolutely. Our deep dive tonight is into the heart of ninja knife throwing, as this manual lays it out. We're going to explore everything from the knives themselves to how they might be used and even defended against. Okay, let's unpack this. What's the fundamental reason a ninja would even carry throwing knives?
Well, the manual's prologue gives us this really vivid scene. Kenji, infiltrating under disguise, yet he's still carrying 4 concealed throwing knives alongside his main combat knife.
Hmm,
This immediately tells you they weren't just a secondary thought, but an integral part of his readiness, his
yeah.
preparedness.
Right. And the manual clearly lays out 3 main objectives for a ninja using throwing knives. First, distraction, second, to wound, and third, the most demanding one, to kill. It really emphasizes the immense skill needed for that final lethal outcome.
And what's fascinating here is the implied tactical thinking. Carrying multiple concealed knives suggests a kind of multi-layered approach to any encounter, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
The combat knife for close quarters, obviously, but these thrown blades for creating opportunities or maybe neutralizing threats from a distance. The manual notes the standard loadout was typically 4 throwing knives plus their main combat knife.
So these weren't just last resorts, but a planned part of their potential actions. Okay, now let's get down to the hardware. Where would someone back then or even now actually get these specialized throwing knives?
The manual, written back in '86, offers some surprisingly practical advice. It mentions looking in martial arts magazines, which were a huge resource then,
Right, right.
as well as surplus stores, gun shows, even flea markets. It even references a photo 1.1 showing a number of throwing knife designs, which gives you the sense that even then there wasn't just one single standardized ninja throwing knife.
Which makes sense. Adaptability seems key. And for anyone serious about practice, the manual recommends having at least a dozen identical knives, ideally 20 or even 2 dozen.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
That way you're set up for consistent training and can, account for any damage or loss along the way.
And like any tool you use a lot, maintenance is essential. The manual stresses keeping them clean, dry, and free of rust. Interestingly, it points out that some throwing knives are designed so they don't really need sharpening, while others might require a mill bastard file.
One now.
A mill bastard file, it's a type of coarse file. Or an oil stone, a lubricated sharpening stone, depending on the blade's metal.
Okay, it's good to know they're built tough, though. The manual mentions they're hard to break under normal use, and even if they get bent, you can often just carefully bend them back straight.
But if one does break outright, the advice is clear. Retire it. Get a replacement. Don't risk it.
Makes sense. Now, what makes a good throwing knife? What are the key design features?
The manual highlights 3 critical aspects: length, weight, and balance. For length, they suggest between 9 and 16 inches. That gives a good mix of flight characteristics, power, and penetration potential.
Okay.
Shorter than that, maybe not enough penetration. Longer, and they just get cumbersome, hard to throw accurately. Shorter knives, it notes, are better for distraction, less likely to be lethal.
And weight. There's this really cool old ninja saying in the manual, a thrown knife should not fly like a feather or a rock, but like the beak of a hawk.
That's such a vivid image, isn't it?
Yeah.
The manual elaborates, suggesting about 1 ounce of weight per inch of length. That's a good guideline. Too light, it lacks impact. Too heavy, it's slow and cuts down your range. That hawk's beak maxim really speaks to finding that ideal balance, enough force without being clumsy. Like any well-tuned tool, really.
Exactly. So what about balance? That sounds crucial.
Oh, absolutely. The manual goes into different types. The most versatile are center balanced, meaning you can throw them effectively holding either the handle or the blade. It even suggests a simple test. Just balance the knife on your finger to find that center point.
Okay. And the others.
Then you have knives designed specifically for handle throwing, which usually means they're heavier towards the blade end.
Right.
These generally need to complete a full rotation or a whole number of rotations to hit point first. Flip side, blade thrown knives often have a heavier handle and a lighter blade, and they typically need a half spin or an odd number of half spins to strike properly. It sounds like understanding the balance is fundamental to picking the right throwing technique for that specific knife.
Totally. It dictates the physics of the throw.
Precisely. And the manual even draws a distinction between dedicated throwing knives and regular combat knives. It points out that throwing knives are often flat, maybe without traditional contoured handles, because their main job isn't hand-to-hand fighting, it's being thrown.
This next bit was quite a surprise to me. The manual suggests that once you get the principles of balance and throwing down, you can even get good at throwing like ordinary objects.
Yeah.
It specifically mentions screwdrivers, where you'd naturally adjust your grip and throw based on whether the handle or the metal part is heavier. It even suggests practicing on cardboard boxes.
The underlying principle here is key. Understanding the physics of a projectile, how it moves, how it rotates.
Right.
The manual does caution against, wrecking your tools during practice, but the core message is about adaptability. A skilled ninja could potentially turn almost anything nearby into a temporary weapon just by understanding these basic forces.
It really highlights that ninja ethos of resourcefulness, doesn't it? Making do with what's available.
Totally.
Okay, so we've got the knives. Now, the crucial part. How do you actually send them flying accurately? Let's get into the different throwing methods.
The manual outlines two fundamental grips, the handle grip and the blade grip. For the handle grip, you center the end of the handle in your palm, thumb wrapped around the side, kind of securing it.
Okay.
The manual recommends vertical throws with this grip for the best velocity and penetration. It mentions photos 2.5 through 2.8 illustrate this, giving you a visual idea.
And the blade grip, how's that different?
With the blade grip, you hold the very end of the blade itself, thumb running parallel along the spine, the flat back edge. Again, vertical throws are recommended here for the best results. Photos 2.9 through 2.12 apparently show the details.
Got it. Are there other grips mentioned?
Yeah, beyond those two basics, the manual briefly touches on the pinch grip and the palm grip, with illustrations in photos 2.13 through 2.18. These seem to offer more versatility, allowing for different throwing styles, underhand, overhand, sidearm, vertical, horizontal, depending on the situation, and maybe even the object being thrown.
Now, let's talk about the actual motions. The overhand throw first. How's that described?
The manual describes bringing your arm back behind your ear, shifting your body weight forward as you throw, and releasing the knife just before you reach the end of your throwing motion. Then there's a smooth continuation of that movement, the follow-through.
Okay.
Photos 2.19 and 2.20 apparently show this using a blade grip. It sounds quite similar mechanically to throwing a baseball, actually.
Yeah, I can picture that.
There are definitely parallels in the body mechanics, yes. Then there's the underhand throw.
How does that work?
Here, you bring your arm back behind your hip, propel it forward in an upward arc, and release the knife just before the end of that forward motion, again with a follow-through for balance. Photos 2.21 and 2.22 show a palm grip being used for this one.
Okay.
The manual points out this throw can be really effective at close range, and there's even a modified reverse motion for throwing while you're running.
That makes sense for a quick reactive throw when you're on the move.
Exactly.
What about the sidearm throw?
Oh.
That sounds like it might be a bit trickier to control.
The manual explicitly says it is more challenging to master. It draws a comparison to throwing a frisbee or maybe a sidearm pitch in baseball.
Okay.
You bring your arm back to the side and swing it across your body, releasing the knife with really precise timing just before the end of the swing. Photos 2.23 and 2.24 show a pinch grip being used here. The biggest hurdle, according to the manual, is getting a straight and accurate flight path. It's easy for it to curve off.
Now, the orientation of the blade during flight. Vertical versus horizontal. That seems like it would make a big difference.
Oh, huge difference. The manual clarifies this with diagrams 2.1 and 2.2. Vertical throws, where the sharp edge is cutting through the air, face less resistance, so they're faster, more likely to penetrate deeply.
Right.
Horizontal throws, where the flat side is pushing against the air, get more resistance. This naturally reduces the range, the speed, and how deep it can penetrate. However,
Yeah.
the manual notes that for very short distances, say within 5 to 10 feet, a horizontal throw can be just as effective. Maybe for a quick, unexpected strike where deep penetration isn't the main goal.
It's all about understanding the physics and the technique for the situation. And speaking of hitting your mark, how do you gauge how hard to throw or how many rotations the knife needs to make to hit point first? That seems like magic.
Huh. Well, not quite magic, but it definitely takes practice. It comes down to dedicated training and developing the ability to accurately judge distances. The manual really emphasizes starting your training by throwing at clearly marked distances.
Okay.
You gradually increase that range from maybe an initial 5 feet all the way up to 30 feet. More advanced training could push that even further, maybe to 50 feet.
And the rotation of the knife in flight is key to ensuring it impacts point first, right? You want it hitting handle first.
Absolutely critical. For very short throws, say under 10 feet, the knife might travel almost straight without much rotation, but as the distance increases, the knife will naturally complete one or more full or half rotations.
So how do you control that?
The manual stresses that practical experience is the only real way to develop an intuitive feel for how many rotations are needed for a given distance and grip. It's about countless repetitions. Remember, handle-thrown knives generally need a whole number of spins, while blade-thrown knives often work best with half-spin rotations.
So it's not just the arm motion, but this whole complex calculation happening unconsciously. Distance, grip, rotation. Wow. Now, all this talk of sharp flying objects, it sounds like safety would have to be a massive concern.
Oh, absolutely. Safety is paramount. The manual lists several crucial rules. Always, always wear safety glasses or goggles. Protect your eyes.
Number one.
Use a mouthpiece to guard your teeth, just in case of a weird bounce back. Make sure any observers are positioned well behind the thrower, never beside or in front.
Common sense, yeah.
And always use a proper backstop and target. It can't be stressed enough. These are dangerous weapons. Treat them with respect, keep them away from kids and irresponsible adults, and never ever throw carelessly or when you're distracted.
That all sounds like essential stuff when you're dealing with any potentially dangerous tool, really.
Yeah.
What about the actual training schedule and methods? How often, how much?
The manual recommends a consistent training regimen, at least 3 sessions per week, with a minimum of 200 throws, 200 casts in each session.
200, wow.
Yeah, it's a lot of repetition. The focus at the beginning should be on mastering one specific throwing technique at a time. You progress sequentially. First, just getting the knife to stick firmly in the target.
Okay, step one.
Then, improving your accuracy within that stick. Then, developing power behind your throws. Then, increasing your speed, getting the knife out and thrown quickly. And finally, practicing throwing from various stances and positions, not just standing perfectly still.
And where should someone actually set up to do all this throwing? You can't just do this in the backyard, usually.
Choosing a safe environment is absolutely critical, whether you're indoors or outdoors. And having a proper backstop is non-negotiable. Indoors, you need to be extremely careful. No windows nearby, no fragile furniture. Ideally, you'd have a whole wall covered with either sturdy wood like soft pine or thick padding to safely absorb missed throws.
What about regular walls?
Plaster and concrete walls are strongly discouraged. They can be easily damaged, sure, but more importantly, the knives are much more likely to bounce back unpredictably, which is dangerous.
Oh, good point. And outdoors.
Outdoors, you need a wide open space, well away from people, pets, roads, buildings, anything that could be hit accidentally. You also need to be constantly aware that someone might unexpectedly wander into your practice area. Situational awareness is key.
The backstop itself sounds really important then for containing throws.
Absolutely crucial. It provides that safe barrier to stop stray throws and gives you a stable surface to attach your targets. The manual even includes a basic design diagram 3.1 for building either a portable or a permanent backstop.
What's it made of?
Usually soft pine planks or boards held together securely with carriage bolts or nails. It emphasizes making sure no bolt ends or nail heads are sticking out because that could damage your knives when they hit.
Oh, yeah.
And also treating the wood with a sealant if it's going to be outdoors, to protect it from rain and sun.
And for the targets themselves, how do you progress?
You start simple. Beginners might just aim to hit the backstop consistently from close range, maybe 10 feet. The progression involves trying to get, say, all 10 of your practice throws to stick in the target area.
Okay.
Then you move on to paper discs of smaller and smaller sizes. Start with maybe an 8-inch diameter disc, then work your way down to 4 inches, 2 inches, even a tiny 1-inch disc eventually.
Wow, 1 inch. That's serious precision.
Definitely. Diagram 3.2 shows a recommended layout for 9 of these disc targets, arranged so they're not too close together, minimizing the chance of one knife hitting another and bouncing off wildly.
Now, that's all about hitting stationary targets.
Hmm.
What about more dynamic, less predictable situations? Like real-world stuff?
This is where the training gets particularly interesting, maybe a bit intense. The manual recommends incorporating practice with moving targets at least once a week. But crucially,
Yeah.
it stresses over and over again, never use real throwing knives against a live person or animal in practice, ever.
Okay, good. So what do you use?
It suggests using practice knives made from softer materials, wood, plastic, hard rubber, or even just simple wooden dowel rods with the ends rounded off for safety. Diagram 3.3 apparently shows some example patterns for these.
That makes perfect sense. You want the motion and the timing practice without the, risk of impalement.
Exactly. Safety first.
But how do you make that kind of practice feel more realistic then? How do you know if you hit?
Here's where it gets a little unconventional, maybe even a bit strange to modern ears. The manual suggests coating the tip of your practice knife with a small amount of Vaseline.
Vaseline.
Yeah, or even a mixture of Vaseline and red food coloring to simulate the impact of a hit and leave a visible mark on the target person's clothing or skin.
Huh. Okay, I guess that works. Like paintball almost.
Kinda, yeah. This allows both the thrower and the target to see if contact was made. The training then involves working through different scenarios. The thrower focuses on those 3 goals: distract, wound in a safe, simulated way, or kill, again, just with the practice knife.
And the target person.
The person acting as the target focuses on techniques for dodging the thrown objects and potentially even taking out the thrower in the scenario. The manual suggests practicing in various simulated environments: indoors, outdoors, a forest setting, city setting, day, night, mixing it up.
That's a pretty immersive approach to training resilience and reaction. And alongside this dynamic practice, regular target practice is still fundamental, right?
Absolutely. Non-negotiable. The manual recommends twice-weekly sessions, throwing around 200 knives each time at marked distances from 5 up to 30 feet. It really encourages experimenting. Try different grips, different throws at different ranges to find what works best for you.
What about the practical side of throwing 200 knives?
Right.
Losing them in the grass or whatever must be pretty common.
Oh, yeah. The manual addresses this practical headache. It suggests a couple of simple fixes: spray painting your knives in bright, easy-to-see colors like orange or yellow,
Smart.
or attaching bright-colored cords or ribbons to the handles so they're easier to spot if you have a bad throw and they go flying off into the bushes.
Good tips. And for those really looking to push their limits, there's mention of long-range throws.
Yes. Throws beyond that standard 30 feet, extending up to an approximate maximum effective range of about 50 feet. The manual cautions, though, that this requires an exceptional degree of skill, power, and control just to get the knife to stick consistently at that distance, let alone accurately.
50 feet.
Hmm.
That's pretty far for a thrown knife.
It really is.
So the big message from this whole training section seems to be that reading about knife throwing,
Yeah.
not going to cut it.
Not even close. The manual concludes the training chapter by stating unequivocally, consistent, dedicated practice, at least 3 times a week, 200 throws per session, in all sorts of weather conditions, for a minimum of 1 full year. That's just to master the basics.
A full year for the basics. Wow. Okay, so we've covered the tools, the intense training. Now let's talk about how these skills might actually be applied in a real combat situation, according to the manual.
Right, the application. The manual revisits those 3 primary combat objectives: distract, wound, kill. For distraction, the best target is the face.
Why the face?
Because a thrown knife coming at your face triggers an almost automatic flinch, a defensive reaction. That split second of hesitation or looking away can buy the ninja valuable time to escape or to launch a different attack. It's about creating an opening.
Okay, wounding then is more about impairing movement.
Exactly. Focusing on softer parts of the body, the lower torso, the thighs. Slow them down, make it harder for them to pursue or fight back. But the manual does include a stark warning about hitting the femoral artery in the thigh.
Right, you mentioned that.
Yeah, a strike there could be unintentionally lethal, much more severe than just a hindering wound, something to be aware of.
And then we get to the most difficult and frankly disturbing objective: to kill. Where does the manual suggest aiming?
The manual identifies the throat or neck area, the eyes, the temples, the sides of the head, and even an open mouth as the most likely lethal targets for a thrown knife.
That sounds incredibly difficult to hit under pressure.
Immensely difficult, and interestingly, the manual directly pushes back against the common movie trope of easily killing someone with a knife thrown into their chest or back.
Yeah, you see that all the time.
Right. But the manual explains that the dense muscle, ribs, and sternum in the torso make it very difficult for a thrown knife, which has limited momentum compared to a thrust, to penetrate deeply enough to reliably hit vital organs.
So the action movies definitely take some a dramatic license
A
there.
lot of license.
The manual also mentions some secondary, maybe less conventional uses for throwing knives in combat. Less about cutting, more about impact.
Yes, exactly. One technique mentioned is intentionally throwing the knife flat, or even handle first. The goal isn't penetration, but to subdue or stun an opponent, often by aiming for the head. It's like using it as a blunt instrument from a distance.
That sounds hard to control, too.
The manual acknowledges it's difficult to master, but could be useful perhaps for capturing someone alive rather than killing them.
And then there's some really specialized applications, almost
Right.
like turning the throwing knife into a delivery system.
Right, it gets pretty wild. The manual describes attaching small blinding dust bombs to the knife,
Mhm.
or even tiny smoke, explosive, or incendiary grenades.
Wow.
It also mentions the rather dramatic idea of creating flaming knives,
Mm.
wrapping cloth soaked in flammable liquid around the blade or handle, lighting it, and then throwing it.
Like something out of a fantasy novel.
Pretty much. And maybe most chillingly, it discusses the use of poison knives, coating the blade with a poison paste. In this specific case, handle throws are strongly recommended, obviously, to avoid the thrower accidentally poisoning themselves.
Yikes.
The manual does include a significant note of caution regarding using poison, emphasizing the extreme dangers involved for everyone.
It paints a picture of a very versatile, incredibly dangerous tool in the hands of a skilled ninja. Now let's flip the script. What if you're on the receiving end? How does the manual suggest defending against a thrown knife?
The manual outlines 3 basic defenses, presented in order of increasing difficulty and, frankly, decreasing likelihood of success:
Yeah.
dodging, blocking, and catching.
Dodging sounds like the obvious first choice.
It's presented as the primary defense. It relies on your ability to anticipate the knife's trajectory, reading the thrower's body language, and moving yourself out of the path just before they release it. Requires incredible awareness and super fast reflexes.
That sounds incredibly hard. Split-second timing? What about blocking?
Blocking involves using something, a weapon, an everyday object, maybe even your hand, to deflect the knife in midair. The manual strongly emphasizes that evasion, dodging, should always be your first reaction, so that if your block fails, you're hopefully already moving out of the direct line of fire. It suggests using a sword or a staff to sweep the knife aside. Even mentions grabbing everyday objects like books or, kitchen pots as improvised shields in a pinch.
Blocking with your hand sounds like a really bad idea, though.
The manual strongly cautions against it unless you are a highly trained ninja. And even then, it says it should only be practiced with extreme caution, using practice knives, never real ones. The risk of severe injury is just too high.
Yeah, I'll stick to dodging, thanks. And finally, the almost mythical act of catching a thrown knife. Does the manual even entertain that?
It does, but with heavy caveats. It refers to catching a thrown knife as requiring the utmost mastery and explicitly states it's only recommended for highly skilled ninjutsu masters.
So basically, don't try this at home.
Absolutely not. The advice is clear. Prioritize evasion first. Then, if absolutely necessary and you possess the extraordinary skill, attempt to maybe pinch or snatch the spinning handle as it passes by, not
Yeah.
the blade.
Still sounds terrifying.
And in bold, capital letters, the manual warns, do not attempt these dangerous techniques with real knives.
Okay, message received loud and clear. Avoidance is always the best strategy. Now, with all this talk about flying blades, the possibility of injuries, whether in training or, God forbid, a real encounter, seems unavoidable.
Yeah.
How does the manual address treating those wounds?
Yeah, it faces that reality. The manual stresses the critical importance of being prepared. It emphasizes that all wounds should be treated seriously because of the risks. Infection is always a danger, and in a combat situation, there's the possibility of poison.
So prevention first.
Prevention is the best approach, absolutely. Strict safety protocols during training. But if an injury does occur, the manual advises seeking immediate professional medical attention whenever possible. Don't try to be a hero.
And in the meantime, basic first aid.
Exactly. Apply direct pressure to the wound to control bleeding. If that's not enough, use indirect pressure points and elevate the injured limb unless it's a head wound, then don't elevate.
Hmm.
It also notes that a serious ninja practitioner should really have a working knowledge of advanced first aid and should always carry a well-stocked emergency medical kit. Be prepared for the worst.
It's a sobering reminder that even with incredible skill, there are inherent dangers in this path. Well, we've covered an amazing amount of ground in this deep dive, from the why behind carrying these blades to the specific techniques and the risks involved. Time to maybe summarize some key takeaways.
Yeah, let's recap. We've learned that ninja knife throwing isn't just random, it's a highly deliberate skill with those three main goals: distract, wound, and much harder, kill. The knife itself, its length, weight, and especially its balance, is fundamental. It
Well,
dictates the throw, the rotation needed. Getting good requires intense, consistent training. Focusing on technique first, then accuracy, power, speed, throwing from different positions, even against moving targets eventually, all while being incredibly strict about safety. In combat, these skills offer flexibility from creating a quick diversion to potentially a lethal strike, though the manual is realistic about how hard that kill shot is with a thrown blade.
yeah.
And if you're facing one, dodge first, block second if you must, and catching, leave that to the absolute masters in controlled environments.
And it's really interesting to circle back to that afterward in the manual, which kind of challenges the whole idea of the knife being the ninja weapon.
Right. It states the knife isn't necessarily the preferred weapon, but often the first weapon they learn after mastering their own mind and body.
Hmm.
It emphasizes this broader philosophy of adaptability, being capable with lots of tools or even, with no weapons at all. Resourcefulness again.
That really reframes the intense focus on knife throwing, doesn't it? It's not about becoming just a knife specialist.
Exactly. It suggests it's more about building a foundation, understanding weapons, physics, movement, the principles of combat that you can then apply much more broadly. It's a building block, not the whole structure.
So here's maybe a final thought to ponder for you, our listener. Considering the incredible dedication and the multifaceted skills involved in mastering even this one single aspect of ninjutsu throwing knives, what other seemingly specialized, maybe even mythical-sounding disciplines might actually hold surprisingly deep and practical knowledge just waiting to be uncovered?
That's a great question.
It really makes you think about the value of focused training, deliberate practice, and truly understanding the underlying principles behind any art or skill, doesn't it? Not just the surface techniques.